gun. Manning lets it fly. It's caught by Thomas. There's the record for Peyton Manning.
Saludos and salutations, Broncos country, and welcome to another exciting episode of Broncos Talk. I'm your host, Alan Diaz, and joining me to my right, as always, my co-host, RichiRichEh. Richie, how you doing today, my friend?
Not bad. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Richie. Thank you very much for asking. And Rich, before we get into the recap of what happened this past weekend, just want to go over a couple of things with you guys out there in Broncos country. Just want to remind everybody that Broncos Talk and the MHRT network in general is a Broncos-based podcast where we fill you in on all things NFL news, but more importantly, Broncos news. Broncos Talk goes live every single Tuesday at 7654 on all our social media platforms. So make sure you click that notification button so you get live notifications on when we go live. Tuesdays is Broncos Talk. On Thursdays, it's the flagship show at MHRT network with the boss Mundungus, Glenn Hauser, Mr. Boggins, and myself. And then on Friday, we have the Nothing Rhymes with Orange and Blue podcast with our good friends Johnny and Isaiah. And then, of course, just before every single game, an hour or so before, we have The Neigh-borhood, which is the pregame show that stars a couple of us who's ever available to be on that day to come on, and we talk all things Broncos. We get down to the nitty-gritty. We talk stats and what the Broncos have to do to win that game. So make sure you guys hit that notification button so you never miss out whenever we go live on any one of our shows, and yet you're always up to date with anything and all things MHRT Network. So with that being said, Rich, let's get into today's the recap show, which is basically the Broncos game against the Baltimore Ravens. And, I don't think anybody in Broncos country pictured the way this game went, especially the second half. The first half, the first quarter, to me was, it looked like just Broncos offense going to work. Albert O, just that got to close your hands, man. I mean, that was a walk-in touchdown if there ever was one. Maybe getting pushed out of bounds if the defender was able to get a step on him, but he had the ball in his hand, Rich, and that would have been an easy touchdown. But aside from that, Teddy Bridgewater was able to get a touchdown in was it second quarter, I believe, or maybe the first? I don't remember when it was, but it was in the first half, that's for sure. So aside from that, the offense kind of towards halftime was kind of stalled out a little bit, where there were plays that could have been made, but they weren't. It was either because I think the play calling for some reason changed, and the Broncos started to kind of pull away from the run game, especially in that second quarter. In that first quarter, we had that beautiful run by Javonte Williams. I mean, he had people behind him, Rich, and I'll turn it over to you. To me, was probably the best Broncos highlight we'll see so far, maybe all year.
In terms of running play, it's going to be extremely difficult to beat that. There is a handful of running plays that come to mind over the course of just watching the NFL in general that I can think of that would be at a similar caliber to that. There are just not many running backs and not many running plays where you see a running back break that many tackles that quickly and then proceed to drag guys 10 to 20 yards down the field. That just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It also goes to show you how important tackling is. I don't know if you noticed the defender from the Ravens attempted to tackle him up in the upper portion of his body as opposed to attempting to lock and wrap his legs. He could have brought him down 10 to 20 yards sooner if he had allowed himself to slide down and try to lock his legs or trip him up that way. And instead, he just kind of hung on and said, I guess I'll eventually slow him down. And he didn't.
No, he sure as heck did it. Now, I will take, and I agree with every single Broncos fan that talked about it on Twitter and social media. The hit put on Bridgewater just before the end of the half, and it was uncalled. It wasn't flagged. to me was a really, really big turning point for the Broncos, because it would have given the Broncos 15 yards. It would have stopped the clock, which I think the clock was already stopped, but it would have given them 15 yards. So it would have given Denver more choices in terms of, trying to figure out what to do.
Right.
So that not being called. And also, I don't know if you saw this, Rich, but when Lamar Jackson threw that touchdown pass to Hollywood Brown, Lamar Jackson taunted one of the defensive. I don't know which one. It was Mike Purcell. He taunted him clearly, and that was not called for. And so far in the last 4 weeks around the entire NFL, we've seen some really, really stupid taunting calls that even if you're not a fan of that team, you just look at it and it's like, that's not taunting. That's just, that's just being caught in the moment.
Right.
But what he did, that was taunting, and it wasn't called for. And to me, Rich, that was I don't know what the refs were watching in those two plays, but I do hope that when the refs go back and look at maybe not so much the one with Lamar Jackson, but the one that knocked out Teddy Bridgewater, that I don't know, can you actually find a player for a hit like that even after the fact, even after they weren't?
There's been precedent for fines after the fact. Whether or not they're going to do it, yet to be seen. Mm-hmm. There's also the defenseless receiver hit on Deontay Spencer. I actually rewatched that hit. It was not a high hit. It was just a defenseless receiver. So we need to, just be mindful in terms of what we want to call out as Broncos fans. Trust me, I understand. When you first saw it live, you said, man, that was a high hit. It hit him in the head, hit him in the shoulders, or the neck. It did not. When you rewatch the replay, even on the live game film, they had the secondary angle, which was the replay of that hit. You'll note that the angle, the proper angle from on the field, he actually hit him in the upper chest, which is actually quite fitting and fits with what Spencer is now being called for right now, which is having a chest injury, right? So everything kind of fits there in terms of what happened. I'm going to go back to the Lamar Jackson one. To me, the NFL has made such a point of emphasis on this taunting nonsense. And I see it as nonsense because, that's football as far. Can you imagine every Deion Sanders interception where he turns around and does the high step that there's a flag? It killed me. But anyways, when you look at that, we are, as Broncos country, we saw Dalton Reisner have a less egregious taunting penalty called on him. What was it? 2 games ago, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2 games ago.
2 games ago. So, if you're going to call it consistently, then call it consistently. And unfortunately, that taunting call, or should I say the taunting call that was not, is one of several calls in that game, including the other 2. And there were several other calls, including pass interference calls, that were not called as well, that were quite blatant and obvious.
Yeah. And before we continue, Rich, let's say hello to some of the people in the chat room. I was bringing up some of the comments while you were highlighting. Mohammed, how you doing? The Boss Mundungus in the house. Dave Glassman, EJ, Johnny Baki. Who else do we have in here? I saw Vic, whose comment we have highlighted, and Shadow Jacker. So hello to all you guys. Thank you guys for taking the time to come by and, just sit down and talk Broncos with us. So if you guys have any comments or questions or anything you want to talk about, just let us know in the comment section. Richie and I will try to get to everything as best as we can with the time allotted to us. Avatar jumping in saying, what's up, Broncos country?
Hey, Avatar,
how you doing, my friend? There's a comment here by Johnny that I was reading. He said, ultimately, the Broncos were outcoached in every facet of the game. And I can't help but agree with you there, Johnny, because it just seemed like even though the Broncos started well, unfortunately, that momentum just it went downward. The injuries started to pile up. The change of quarterback didn't really help things. And then Vic Fangio's coaching method of hogging timeouts like they were gold or something. I don't know what you want to say. So I totally agree with you on that part. And Johnny, he also says, let's not forget the quote unquote clean hit on Spencer as well. So yeah, let's not forget that. David Glassman saying, I don't think the hit on TB was dirty, but it should have been flagged, but not fine.
I would normally agree with you. However, the problem that I have is that it was not flagged. So now the only way that the league can actually make up for effectively not enforcing their own rules properly is to fine the player, which I disagree with. But I think it's the only appropriate action the league can take now, effectively for their lack of inconsistency. And this is all on the NFL and the officiating. If you're going to call these hits and high hits on the quarterbacks and not allow that body weight to fall down like we saw in Teddy on that hit there, which caused his head, I don't know if you saw any of the replays, his body fell down in like the absolute perfect concussion mode almost, which was legs, hips, head. And it's a very, very common way for someone to get a concussion. I saw several tweets on Twitter, a few Facebook takes and stuff like that to say, how the heck did he get a concussion? That type of fall is one of the most common ways you get a concussion. And a concussion is typically caused by the rattling of the brain inside the skull. And of course, if you have all of your body weight whipping down on your head, you can imagine that it's probably not going to end well in terms of concussion.
Mm-hmm. Mundungus Creevy saying Fangio overcompensated for Lamar and Shermer overcompensated in the second quarter. This is totally true here, Rich.
I agree.
Because the Broncos front D line did a really good job in terms of limiting Lamar's running. But for some reason, the defense couldn't accommodate when they saw that Lamar Jackson was like, okay, you don't want me to run? That's fine. I'll throw the ball, which is exactly what Lamar did. He racked up over 300 yards. Only the second or third time, if I remember correctly, that Lamar Jackson has ever thrown for that many yards in his NFL career. So, and then against our defense makes it even worse. The fact that our safeties got caught in two blown coverages, well, the ones that where they scored. But, and I don't so much blame Patrick Surtain because Patrick Surtain is a rookie, so he's going to learn, playing trade by fire. So he's trying to cover for Ronald Darby. So, his plate's already full and he's got big shoes to fill in that regard. But the only shining light from that secondary was Caden Stearns, who is starting to look like that real diamond in the rough for the Broncos. And thankfully, Denver usually has one or two in their pocket every season. And Caden Stearns looks to be that diamond in the rough. But I totally agree with you here, boss. It seems that for some reason, if the Ravens are showing you they're going to throw the ball, I don't know why the defense couldn't shift that way. And it's like, okay, break out and cover the field, cover the spread. So even if Lamar Jackson runs, he's not going to run very far because the defensive line, it was doing a pretty good job in making sure that nobody was running. They only had like one really good run, Rich, and that was the run where they ran for the touchdown, which Latavius Murray, I think. That ran for and he ran right over Justin Simmons. I don't know if Simmons couldn't get back up or what it was, but he just went right over him.
We do need to slow that back a little bit. Jonathan Cooper bit too far ahead when it was a run play. He actually got caught out of his lane and out of his assignment. He went too far forward and didn't stay further back when it was a handoff rather than rushing. So he kind of jumped too far ahead. That opened the lane in behind him, which then frankly, I agree. Simmons and I can't remember who the other
Jackson.
Jackson was on the other side. It was another cornerback behind. They should have been able to come up and stop that, but they didn't. And unfortunately, in my opinion, that was largely on Cooper for biting too aggressively on the run play, and it opened up that lane for Murray. But again, Justin Simmons is a safety. His job, or one of his main jobs, is to act as that cleanup on that play, and he got jumped over.
Yeah, I don't know if he was on the ground trying to get back up or he was going down. There was something he wasn't standing upright. So it wasn't so much a missed tackle, but it was just kind of like I as much as I've seen that play back to back to back to back, I can't see a camera angle where it was like, did he get shoved? Did he trip? Or was he actually trying to make a play and he missed Latavius Murray and Murray just walks in for the score. So the defense, even though, and a lot of people were giving the defense crap on social media, but they didn't break Rich, because even though the Broncos gave up 2 touchdowns in the first half, they only gave up 6 points in the second. So that is just how the Vic Fangio defense works. You know, they'll bend this time a little bit more than what we're used to the last 3 games, but they didn't break where it was like a gigantic blowout where the Ravens ran, buck wild on the Broncos as previous offenses from the last couple of seasons have done before. So that's probably my only highlight for the defense, and is that in the second half, they didn't go out and then just, completely give up and say, oh, everything is lost because Bridgewater was gone. Spencer was hurt. Denver's O-line was missing 2 of its starting linemen. So the line wasn't as strong as it would normally be or has been the last 3 weeks.
So I have a few different takes than a few people when it comes to some of the high level general stuff. I've seen a bunch of other stuff. Like I said, I rewatched the game back to back, and I saw some different things than what I was seeing from other people. So my notes on Simmons in the first half was he had a good pass breakup kind of in the earlier stage. Then unfortunately, the rest of his game, including the second half and the first half, was just, I have no other word other than to call it atrocious. He is one of our top paid defenders. He's meant to be a leader on the team. And unfortunately, that's just not the type of game you can have from that's someone who's supposed to be a strong leader like that on the team. The other thing that was really concerning to me, and this has been a bit of a trend in the last 4 games so far, and we're going to have to talk about this a little bit later in the show when we get on to our Steelers discussion, and that is our interior defensive line pressure. We really and truly have not had good pressure from the interior of our defensive line. And you can just kind of go right across the board there. That interior on the guard center and the 2 guards in the center and pushing up the middle was not there. And that allowed Lamar to kind of shimmy shake in the pocket and get those throws off that you were talking about earlier. I already spoke about Cooper. I also had Bowles in the first half where he, on one drive, 2 out of the 3 downs, he allowed pressure and eventually a sack. And then, and that was right after the Ravens' first touchdown, which kind of went against a little bit of what I was seeing on social media. Like I mentioned before I kind of started here, where everyone kept on blaming the guards in the earlier half of the game and then flipped over to the offensive tackles. I actually thought both guards played relatively well. And I actually thought Miners may have, in fact, been our best offensive lineman on the field throughout the game. So I saw Bowles and Massey both getting beat pretty badly throughout the game, which I felt really, really hurt us as a team.
No, and you know what? And actually, I was going to segue into what Jerry Holland is talking about, where he says, start Locke, give him the revenge game. Let Teddy get his head cleared completely. Hello, Jerry, by the way. So, you know what? I was really excited, Jerry, when I saw Drew Lock warming up as they were coming back out of the tunnel, because I'm like, okay, this is exactly what Drew Lock was waiting for. We all were bummed out when the news came out that Teddy Bridgewater was going to start over Drew Lock. At least, I mean, for all the Drew Lock supporters. But we all had to kind of sit down and realize that if there was ever a time for Drew Lock to make an entrance, it was this time. And this was supposed to be the game where Drew Lock was supposed to go out there and prove, okay, you guys picked him over me. I'm going to show you why you messed up. And unfortunately, it didn't pan out that way. We saw it was kind of like watching a highlight reel of Drew Lock from 2019. I really didn't see anything different from him, except for like he tried his scrambling got a little bit better. There was that one attempt where he almost got away from a sack, but he got pulled down. So his ball control in terms of, not fumbling, did get better, but his ability to read routes has not improved at all. Those passes he threw to Courtland Sutton wasn't even really in the area, especially in that second to last one where you could see on the camera, he told him, he's like, you're supposed to spin around, and Sutton went in and Drew Lock went out. So there was an obvious miscommunication. And then in the very last play, when they were trying to score, Drew Lock's, the running back, was wide open. he ran right down the middle, and for some reason, he forced it down to Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton wasn't even open, and the defender was just there and picked up the ball, or picked off the ball. So I got to say, I really wasn't impressed with Drew Lock. I'm not saying I'm giving up on him, but I think that he missed a huge chance to have gone out there and made a statement. And, if he would have been able to come back and win that game for the Broncos, it would have probably restarted that whole Teddy versus Drew debate that's been going on since training camp all over again. But unfortunately, it just kind of reiterated the fact that the front office made the right choice by giving the starting job to Teddy Bridgewater.
So I'm just going to take a deep breath here, and then I'm going to respond to that. I'll say I agree with some stuff and I disagree with others, except I actually have notes as to why right here. I actually completely agree with one of the comments here with regards to Teddy and some of the other quarterbacks and whatnot. Teddy is clearly the superior quarterback at reading defenses. We've seen that throughout the first games here of the NFL of our season thus far. I don't think there's any question in that. We've seen Teddy make those adjustments. Now, in response to what you just said there and why I agree and I disagree. So I agree in the fact that, no, I don't believe Drew played particularly well. I believe, however, that it was up to Shurmur to make adjustments in his gameplay when he knew he no longer had Teddy Bridgewater in the game, who is capable of making those line adjustments. Teddy Bridgewater is a more cerebral quarterback. That being said, Teddy Bridgewater, even himself, did better and does better when he typically has two tight ends to help seal the edges so that he can read the field and kind of pick apart the opposing defense. In this last game against the Baltimore Ravens, our offense had a 12-1 ratio of 3 wide receiver sets to 2 tight end sets. So to put things in perspective, in the second half, and this is by my count because the stats hadn't come out yet, so I wanted to do the math and kind of count it all myself. I had 22 3 wide receiver sets and 2 tight end sets. So I mean that's like a 1 to 11-1 ratio in the second half. When you have Drew Lock, who is proven to be not read things particularly well, needs a little extra time to throw, and could certainly use a few extra outlets to get the ball out to, particularly larger bodies that are going to be easier to hit. And we already know Drew is a better zip code or area code receiver than he is a pinpoint accurate receiver. Those large body tight ends like your Sauberts, like your Albert O's, even like your Noah Fant, Tim Patrick as a receiver, Courtland Sutton in those kind of short to mid-range throws. We've seen Drew do well on those, and our offensive coordinator did not help Drew Lock in those circumstances by giving him those types of throws and plays down the field or at all. I mean, the numbers and stats in terms of the play calling shows it.
Yeah, well, you know what? I can agree to some of that, Rich, but at the same time, I can't really put all of that on Pat Shurmur, because even though Pat Shurmur didn't change the playbook to accommodate Drew Lock's strengths, which I can totally agree with you on that, but at the same time, Drew Lock has to go through all of his reads and find out which of his wide receivers are better for.
He can't go through reads when he has a guy in his face when the edges aren't able to stay sealed, right? That's
not
what I'm saying.
Not every rush though. He didn't have somebody in his face every single time. There were a couple times where he had to throw. Oh, yeah, and unfortunately, like the 2 missed to Courtland Sutton, if he just picked somebody random, I'd be totally in agreement with you, but he wasn't completely bummed in every single time, because as good as any defensive line is, especially if you don't switch out, substitute your guys, those guys are going to get tired of having to constantly run in. So your quarterback is going to get eventually 1 or 2 times where he can, sit in the pocket a little longer than usual and make the right throw. I'm not crapping on Drew Lock. I'm just saying that he missed a huge opportunity where he could have turned it around, because now he's hoping that Teddy Bridgewater can't clear concussion protocol and he can't start this coming Sunday, and then he'll be the starter because he's already practicing as a starter. The team is repping, getting him prepped for that scenario should it happen. So, and if that's the case, this upcoming game, which we're going to talk to in just a little bit, Rich, that game is a really important game now than it was going into Sunday, because okay, the Broncos aren't undefeated anymore. That takes some pressure off of them in terms of trying to, keep that streak alive. But now it's a prove it game. Now the Broncos have to go out there and prove that, okay, they lost to a good team, but it wasn't a fluke, because now all these analysts or whatever are looking at Denver just kind of like, they're not that good because we beat 3 easy teams, so be it. Teddy Bridgewater lost some credit to that. The defense, as great as it is on paper, lost some credit to that. And, even though injuries kind of have been playing a role in terms of how Denver should be playing, they haven't been as devastating as they were last year. And that's also another thing that the Broncos have to look into trying to limit, which is the injuries, because it seems that almost every single game somebody gets hurt. And with an 18-week season, Rich, we cannot keep going into these games and getting somebody hurt. And, thankfully, or, knock on wood, only 2 of those have been season ending. But the way the Broncos injury history has been going, it could have been a lot worse.
It could have. The other thing I just want to have everyone take note of is the Baltimore Ravens went into that game with either 13 or 14 people on IR, which was about or approximately the same number as we have on our IR right now as well. So I think that while injuries are obviously an issue that's plaguing us, we also need to be mindful of the fact that, it's not like our opponent was perfectly healthy and we were ravaged with injuries. So we do need to kind of readjust a little bit. Now, if Drew Lock is in fact the starter, and we've seen what Drew Lock did in preseason under the 2 tight end sets, where it was the majority of the time when he was in there, and how well he looked on those 2 tight end sets. Shurmur has tape where he's seen Drew look better in those. We know that our run game has typically done better, or at least stayed more consistent in the 2 tight end sets, because it adds flexibility to both go outside and stay inside.
Mm-hmm.
With Shurmur and everyone else seeing that on film, if Shurmur continues to try and shove the 3 wide set, if Drew starts again, and then we lose to the Steelers, everyone doesn't have to forgive me, but basically I'm going to be putting the 90th percentile of the blame on Pat Shurmur for not making adjustments to fit players that he has on the field, because that's the job of the offensive coordinator. You can no longer say that your game plan for the Ravens was predicated on Teddy Bridgewater and you just stuck with it and it was oops, sorry, I made a mistake. You've had the majority of the week to game plan with the assumption that Drew Lock is your guy, so you should be doing so accordingly. And we can see on tape and on film, Drew Lock's personal preference is the 2 tight end set, and he does better with it.
Mm-hmm. And we got a question here, Rich, our first one of the night by Shadowjacker, who asks us, why doesn't the second string quarterback have any reps with the ones in order to prepare in case something happens?
New NFL rule.
Is it?
Timing, there's only so much time you can have on the field with the NFL rules, is my understanding. Someone else who may have something contradictory to that, feel free to please jump in and correct me. But my understanding from everything I've read up on is the reason why you see what you're seeing now and you don't see kind of the way it was, back in the day, is as a result of the NFLPA and the rules that they have for practicing on the field, is that the coaches are only allowed to have the players on the field for a fixed and certain amount of time. As a result of that, the coaches are maximizing their starters with their starters and are no longer able to do as many what ifs, which is what you're referring to there, Shadow, which is let's get our second string quarterback, a handful of reps with the ones. I think you're going to start seeing teams like maybe the Kansas City Chiefs or Pittsburgh Steelers or some of the other teams that have, or Russell Wilson, like the Seahawks, who have veteran quarterbacks. They've already developed that chemistry with their starters, so they don't necessarily need to continue to develop that chemistry per se. So you might see some of those teams get a little bit of reps to their backups with the ones because their starters don't need it. But we're too young of a team and we're too new together as a group for the Broncos to have their backup with starter reps.
The only thing I can say to that, Shadow, is I totally agree with what Richie said, because it sounds like it's an actual rule. But you know what makes it even worse, as I was thinking about that question, was the fact that Drew Lock, even though he's named the backup quarterback, he's not in the exact same situation as any other backup quarterback in the league because Drew Lock was the starter last year. So he had all of these guys for an entire season. The linemen, the wide receivers, obviously no Jerry Jeudy or KJ Hamler weren't on the field, but he had a Tim Patrick. Cortland Sutton was there for a good while, but he had most of these guys out there on the field all of last season. So that's why expectations for him were high. Whereas if it was what's the name of our other Brett Rippon? If it was Brett Rippon going out there for Teddy Bridgewater, I think a lot of people would have ridden the Broncos off a whole lot sooner before they even snapped the ball. But with Drew Lock going out there, he gave everybody hope that, okay, the Broncos got this because Drew Lock knows the system. He knows Pat Shurmur's system. He's been working on it since preseason through training camp. And unfortunately, nothing came out of it. It was just 3 and outs and a pick towards the end in garbage time, which as we wrap up the recap, Rich, the last play from the Ravens was, to me, I think it was just totally fine. There's no rule in the rule book that says you have to take a victory, a knee. I know I do this a lot in Madden, especially against division teams. I just run the ball, or I run a play that I've never run before just to see how it works. And even if it gets intercepted, who cares? I'm going to win. But for them to go and run the ball, because you think about it, if it was the other way around, if it was like, let's say Melvin Gordon needed 5 yards to get 100-something yards.
1,000 yards in the season or something.
1,000 yards in the season. Yeah. Vic Fangio or Pat Shurmur, they're just going to say, hey, go out there and get it. And then we'd be in the exact same situation. So you can't blame them for that. I know Vic Fangio is pissed and he has every right to be mad. But like John Harbaugh said, you shouldn't have thrown the pick. You shouldn't have gave us the ball back with time. You should have just ran out the clock. So obviously that comes back to bite Vic Fangio in the behind.
I agree. I mean, I absolutely agree. And I think my biggest question there is, why didn't we realize that was coming? So I don't know if you saw in the field,
I did it.
but we originally lined up in victory in the like, we're going to lose formation, right? Why was it such a shocker to us to think that a team that was, it'd be one thing if they're like 20 yards away, like in terms of from the rushing thing, they were 5 yards or 3 yards away from maintaining that 100-yard per game record. That should have been a no-brainer for you. Lamar Jackson running around the edge could have gotten them the 3 yards, and we should be prepared for that 100%. And instead, we kind of sauntered out there saying, well, we're going to lose this one. And then they ran the ball on us, and now we're all pissy about it.
Yeah, and not to mention, guys, you have to understand that running a play, especially like that, is totally unnecessary because any one of those Ravens players could have gotten hurt. Any one of those Broncos players could have gotten hurt, just to tackle for a measly 5 yards. So it was a big gamble for both teams, and it was a lot bigger than, just 2 head coaches agreeing on what should have been done and what should have not been done. But as we've heard in the pressers from most of the guys, Rich, the Broncos are pretty positive that we're going to see the Ravens in the postseason. And I really do hope that happens because I have a feeling that things are going to be totally different in round 2.
I'm going to pull this comment up because it basically dovetails into what you just said. I think we can see the Ravens again, but we got to do a whole lot of what Johnny's saying right here. If we want to get there. We just lost to a good team, a team that's now starting to get some of their injured players back. Some of them are starting to return from IR, and they'll be playing again next game and the games to follow. We need to look inwards at ourselves with a critical, mirror, if you will, and we need to really honestly and truly assess ourselves. We need to make the proper adjustments and start to move forward. With that, there was a few moves today that I was a little bit surprised about that we moved on from, including a gentleman's first name that there's not a hope I'm ever pronouncing, and I've said that before on our show, Ferris, the cornerback that we pulled back after he was let go off of the other practice squad. He did really well for us in preseason as a teammate, I believe, of Jerry Jeudy, if I'm not mistaken. He did really well for us. And with our cornerbacks kind of getting beat and that sort of stuff. That to me is a bit criminal on our point, because if he can do well enough to stay on the field, or if we get injuries, keeping a guy that knows our system and is clearly shown to, make picks and do that kind of stuff is kind of a big deal. I was hoping that we keep him. I know we made some other moves today, including letting go of a center that we brought in last week. A lot of churn kind of at the back end of that roster. Ross Jesterman.
Rochesterman Ferris, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure. So R. Ferris. Okay, we got that covered. Thank you. I got. And that's that. But anyways, my point is we need to really do some self-assessment if we're going to do well.
Yeah. Before we get into the next segment about our Mile High Mountain, Rich, I just want to highlight this comment right here from DG King saying, "Oh my God, look at these handsome fellas today." So just wanted to say thanks so much for joining the show. I don't think I've ever seen your name here, so hopefully you're enjoying yourself, my friend. I totally agree. And of course, our good friend Mile High Prophet saying, "Evening, folks. Just got off the Broncos Brooklyn Beat podcast. Almost feel like I'm cheating on the MHRT." You're good, man.
Well, if you feel guilty, then it must be true.
We're just glad you're able to stop by, Prophet. It's always good to see you. And of course, for your tailgate segments that you provide for every single Broncos home game, which I did forget to mention at the beginning of the show. So I do apologize, folks. But Rich, let's get to the Mile High Mountain. Let me just say, for mine, it's not that hard, and I'm pretty sure it's probably what everybody's Mile High Mountain in terms of. For those, actually, let me explain. For those that do not know what our Mile High Mountain segment is, it's where Richie and I highlight where we believe the best player of the game was at the top of the Mile High Mountain, and then at the bottom of the base camp where it was either the worst, could have done better, just not the best. So with that being said, I'll kick it off. And and I did mention this at the beginning of the show. I think my top pick for the Mile High Mountain was Caden Stearns. He shared a sack with Von Miller. It was fantastic. He had a breakup pass for what could have been a big yardage gain for the Ravens. If I think it was Watkins, if I'm not mistaken, where he got the ball out and it was an incomplete. So, and if I was Kareem Jackson, I'd really, really be worried about his future going forward, because I don't see the Broncos trading Kareem Jackson before the deadline, but I can definitely see the Broncos moving on from Kareem Jackson after the season, where it's like, well, we don't have to sit and try to, bargain with Kareem Jackson, try to get him to stay another year in Denver. So for me, Caden Stearns is my pick. Honorable mention goes, of course, to Javonte Williams, which we talked about at the beginning of the show, just carrying people, just trucking through the lines. And it just sucks that Pat Shurmur got away from the running game, and we really didn't see any more of plays like that for the rest of the game. Melvin Gordon, I know he was dealing with some injuries, so hopefully he's okay and he's ready to go for next week's game. For the bottom of the mountain for me, I would probably have to say Drew Lock, because I feel like he really, really let all of his supporters down. I was really hoping he'd go out there and, put people on notice and just bring this team back and, get us a win. And unfortunately that didn't happen. It sucks. And I really do hope that going forward, he can actually learn from his lesson should he ever get that opportunity again. And then an honorable mention would probably be Vic Fangio and his holding the timeout going into the half. He literally burned 35 seconds holding on to a timeout instead of, trying to give his quarterback more time to try to make a comeback and put up some points before the half.
We agree on some and we disagree on some, but such is life, right? So,
exactly.
My Mile High Mountain is very similar to yours. I have Caden Stearns. One point of mention that you called out there, and sorry, Dave, can you please qualify your last name there in your two names? Was Bulls your base camp, or was he also like a secondary person on the Mile High Mountain? I just want you to clarify that, because I might have some comments depending on what your answer is. My Mile High Mountain were Caden Stearns. As I was saying, Caden Stearns had your pass breakup that you mentioned there, which was just incredible. He also had the shared sack with Von Miller, but you also missed. He had a solo sack on his own. So
that's right.
A total of 7 snaps. Guys, count that. 7 snaps. And of those 7 snaps, he had 2 sacks and 1 pass breakup. So let's just say wow. And you know, like wow. And I think Caden Stearns, given his quality of play today or in the last game, really sits kind of a bit of a level above what the other players have, just given the number of snaps and amount of productivity. That can all level off as time progresses, and hopefully he gets more playing time. However, given that game and what he did, good on him. My other one is Javonte Williams. You already called him out for several of his runs. There's obviously the big one that we can all, look in awe into the future and even look back at that and say just wow. And my third is Quinn Miners. I really and truly believe that he was our best offensive lineman on the field in that game. He held his own, and as much as we may hate to admit it as Broncos country, I have noticed a massive difference on the left-hand side of the line with regards to free runners and pressure on our quarterback from the left guard position when he has been in versus when Reisner was in. It pains me to say that because I really, really like Reisner and I really want him to work out. But every time I saw him when he was in, it was a problem. My base camp, Justin Simmons. Again, when you are a top paid safety within the top 5 in the league, and we are looking and seeking to you for leadership, particularly in big games like that, just like we have done with Von Miller, I expect more. And frankly, I thought not only did he not play well, but I felt that he actually let the team down in some of his plays, including the Hollywood Brown touchdown play, where he just kind of watched him run by. So, well, I mean, in all fairness, so did Kareem Jackson, but Kareem Jackson's paid $5 million and Justin Simmons is $15 average per year. So there's a pretty stark difference between who's getting paid more there. Draymond Jones is my other one. I just feel that we need Draymond Jones to step up to get us that interior defensive line pressure. If we cannot start getting that defensive line pressure, we will have a difficult time beating teams like the Ravens and the Steelers and other teams like them with better offensive lines and just better teams and more experienced quarterbacks.
Yeah. And, the only thing I'll say to that is talk about my high profits. I can't remember the last time we heard holding offense number 72. That holding call was really suspect because I saw that in slow motion, and it wasn't really like Garrett Bowles from before where he was pulling or tugging. The defender he was defending spun around him, and Bowles' arm was still stuck there. He was trying to pull his arm back, and unfortunately, the ref saw something different, but it wasn't an exact hold, It was just that his arm was just around.
It wasn't the
his
jersey
chest
grab we've seen of old where you're looking at it and saying, dude, like, what's your problem?
Yeah, it was just the fact. It was just the fact that the defender was rolling past Garrett Bowles, and Garrett Bowles' arm just happened to be out there. But unfortunately, or actually, fortunately, it did enough where it didn't get the quarterback sack. So I'll take it over any day. But on the other hand, to that comment, Drew Lock made a fantastic throw to one of his receivers for a conversion, but it didn't count because of the very questionable hold on Garrett Bowles.
Right, and I forgot to mention my honorable mention for the base camp is Pat Shurmur as well. Sorry, I left that out at the end there. He is he's my honorable mention, like you had at my base camp.
10 cents asking us, are Broncos fans really mad over the 100 thing? No, it's this all came from Vic Fangio and his coaching staff. That's really where it brewed. For as far as I've seen on social media, I haven't really seen anybody be all up in arms over the fact that they ran it, and like Rich and I just said a few minutes ago, it was a very dangerous play because anybody could have gotten hurt on that play instead of, simply taking a knee and, calling it GG. But that's just football. That's just how the way it is. Right. The Ravens went out and did something that matters important to them. And if it were the other way around, Denver would have done the exact same thing. So when we meet this team later on again, rest assured that the Broncos are probably going to do something similar, remembering what they did now, and then it's probably going to start, some type of it's going to piss off Baltimore, just to leave it there in that regard.
If I can just add into that, like I said earlier as well, if as Johnny stepped in and said, if roles were reversed, we would have been pounding on the table saying, why didn't you do it? From our perspective.
Definitely.
And then on the flip side and again, looking at from Baltimore's perspective, you had 3 yards that you needed to gain, and you've been pretty good at moving the ball, generally speaking, against the Broncos defense. If anything, I'm pissed off that our defensive coordinator and just the general personnel that we had out there was not prepared for it. If but nothing else, I was upset we weren't prepared for it and we were scrambling. To me, I expected them to try to run it when they only had 3 yards left, because the announcers even said they only have 3 yards left. And if the Broncos can keep this, they've spoiled a streak that hasn't happened again for 20, 30 years. So, I expected it to happen. We did nothing to stop it. And then we were pissed off that we got ran on for 5 yards and they ended up getting the record. So, if anything, I'm upset that we didn't plan for it.
Agreed. And, with that being said, Rich, let's shift gears and let's look forward to the upcoming game against the Steelers. But before we do that, we have a late question here from Kenneth Booker jumping in. Kenneth Booker, thank you so much for coming in, my friend. He says, did you see that the Broncos special teams kickoff coverage is giving up an average of 44 yards per kick?
Yeah, I did. Thanks for reminding me. I was hoping to forget that by the end of the night, but yeah, I did. And I've said this on previous shows, 6'10". I know you've said something similar as well. At some point you have to change out the coach. And typically I generally agree with the overall general statements. Special teams is largely a representation of the depth of the team and the depth of the roster. So you're using kind of the lower end depth of the roster to represent and go out there and kind of handle their own on special teams. That being said, when you end up with multiple years and multiple roster changeovers and you end up with near identical results, at some point your special team issues are coaching and not all on the player personnel that you have on the team. At first, you can point at the players. This season, I think, is that one season where I actually like some of the back end players on our roster, and you need to point back at Tom McMahon and say, you gots to go.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Rich. But unfortunately, we have to switch gears because we are running short on time, Rich. So, guys, the Ravens game, it happened. It's behind us. It's time to look forward. Let's talk Broncos versus Steelers.
I agree.
And what do you got lined for today, Rich?
Well, today we have Steeler Nation, who's going to bring us the hot five of what the Steelers need to do to beat our Denver Broncos.
All right. So, guys, let's go see what the hot five is for this week with our good host. You said his name, Steeler Nation, right?
Yes.
All right. Let's hear what we has to say.
Hey, Broncos fans, this is G.Stryker with the SteelerNation.com podcast over at SteelerNation.com. These are my 5 keys for the Pittsburgh Steelers to figure out a way to win this weekend against the Denver Broncos. Number 1, you got to pressure Teddy Bridgewater. We've had a lot of injuries across our front 7. Fortunately, we got all-world outside linebacker TJ Watt back last week, as well as his bookend outside linebacker, Highsmith, and both of those guys returning from groin injuries. They should be a little bit more explosive off the edge, and with that 3-man rotation with Ingram, hopefully get some good pressure on Teddy Bridgewater, maybe force some mistakes. Number 2, Steelers have to shore up the run defense. Their run defense is getting gashed. 2 of their top 3 starting defensive linemen are currently gone. Tuitt is on injured reserve, hasn't even been there. Just lost Tyson Alu for the year in week 2 against the Raiders. But Cam Hayward, our all-pro leader of our defense, has to figure out a way to shore up the rest of the offensive line, have those younger players come in and try to limit the running plays by the Denver Broncos. 3 is improved offensive line play. The Steelers now are playing with 2 rookies on the offensive line at center and at left tackle. We got a second year of starter who's starting in his first year, Kevin Dotson at left guard, who's currently banged up. Not sure if he's going to be playing this week yet. And we had our right tackle from last year, the only returning player from our offensive line from the previous season, and Chooks, a core 4. He's dealing with a concussion, missed the game last week. Hopefully getting some of those guys, maybe even might get Zach Banner back, who's supposed to be our right tackle. And he's returning from injured reserve. He was activated last week, did not play in the game, may be activated this week. But that would go a long way in helping the run game improve. We showed some improvement last week, getting some better holes. Hopefully it continues to this week and maybe get a little bit extra more time for our older quarterback, Ben Roethlisberger, to look for some plays down the field. Number 4, speaking of the old man, Big Ben has to return to form. He had a terrible game last week. I personally think he's playing with an injured left pec. It's affecting his body mechanics, and he's just not accurate right now. He's overthrowing, missing wide open targets, which is not his MO. He's a Hall of Fame quarterback. He should be making those plays. He needs to make those plays to beat the Denver Broncos. 5th and final, biggest one on the board, avoid turnovers. Steelers had the turnover advantage in Buffalo, ended up beating Buffalo, a great offensive team, in their home territory week 1. Last 3 weeks, they've been on the negative side. Self-inflicted injuries, turnovers on short fields have killed the Steelers' ability to compete in 3 games against teams they should be competing against. This week is no difference. Steelers can avoid the turnovers and be at advantage in the turnover ratio. That is their best chance of winning this game this Sunday. So until then, Broncos fans, come over and see us, G.Stryker at SteelerNation.com. We appreciate you having us on the show. Have a great game. And for our side, go Steelers!
Wow, Rich, those were some really, really good points. I mean, he basically highlighted almost every single one of, so that was a really good bit. And just so you guys know, I don't watch these ahead of time. I watch them the exact same time you guys do because I like to formulate my thoughts on the air. So, but one good point that he did make, Rich, was talking about their biggest victory was coming up against Buffalo, which was a really, really good offensive team. So the Broncos cannot go into this game lightly thinking that, the Steelers are going to be a walk in the park. Even though they're banged up, even though they're hurting, the Broncos have to go in running on all cylinders and get this win.
I agree. I just wanted to thank Steeler Nation for joining us for the Hot 5 segment. G.Stryker was excellent, awesome to work with. All of G.Stryker and Steeler Nation's links, you can check them out, are below in the description here on YouTube and anywhere you can find the video live. I completely agree with everything that G.Stryker said that they're going to need to do. I just don't personally believe that they can do it because I believe we've seen enough games from the Steelers this season where they have struggled, and they have done so against various teams, not just one type of team. And before we go full onto the Steelers, there was just a recent tweet that came out on from the Denver Broncos. We have just signed inside linebacker Avery Williamson to the practice squad. We had actually also signed a wide receiver, Josh Malone, to the practice squad earlier. So I knew about Malone. Williamson is a new addition that just got tweeted out as our show has gone live. So I wanted to share that with all of you here. With regards to the Steelers, though, we can all circle back and remember what we dealt with the Steelers last year. It was not particularly pretty. And I think we need to avoid a lot of that this year. So what are your thoughts in terms of what we need to do to avoid that?
Well, in terms of, you mentioned last year, the Steelers team this year is totally different from the Steelers of last year. Last year's Steelers were just, they had Bud Dupree, they had a healthy TJ Watt, they were destructive where they didn't need Big Ben to kind of, get them the wins. Their defense alone was the main reason that the Broncos lost, and the fact that Denver went in there with a backup quarterback. I forget his name, but this time around, as our guest just mentioned, the Steelers are really beat up defensively and offensively. They have 2 starting rookies on their offensive line, so it's gonna be chow time for our pass rushers in Von Miller and Malik Reed, and hell, even Jonathan Cooper. And like you said at the beginning of the show, our interior defensive linemen, Shelby Harris and Draymond Jones, and Mike Purcell, those guys have to kind of, get on their high horse and, just get in there, because one thing that we have not been doing very well is, putting pressure on Jeff Driscoll. Thank you so much. Is putting pressure on Big Ben. Now, Big Ben, over the last 3 games, Rich, has really started to show his age, and his injuries are starting to catch up to him. So if there was ever a time for this Broncos defense to, kind of make up for what happened last week, being embarrassed that way, it's this game. And I'm talking turnovers. I'm talking about interceptions. If they can be pick sixes, even better. We need fumbles. We need to put our offense in the scoring positions instead of letting our offense try to march down the field. Especially right now, because as of the recording of this episode, Rich, we don't know who the starting quarterback is, and hopefully
we don't.
And hopefully by the time MHRT kicks off on Thursday, or Nothing Rhymes With, we'll get that question answered, so then we can kind of analyze the game a little bit better in terms of the offense. But whether it's Drew Lock or whether it's Teddy Bridgewater, the defense has to put the ball in favorable positions where if the offense can't get a touchdown, at least we can let the kid McManus, put up 3 points, because those road games, those road wins mean a lot more to this team than the home wins do. And, losing at home sucks, but in the long run, those road game wins go a long way in terms of helping us in, playoffs and stuff.
Right. The one thing I will disagree a little bit with Steeler Nation on is I don't know if you watched any of the game that the Steelers had this past weekend, but
I saw some of it.
Ben was rushed and then pushed and then just flicked a pass. It had to be 30, 40 yards down the field for a touchdown. And that was on a defensive offside by the Packers. So I'm gonna push back a little bit on the fact that Ben is looking. He's certainly not the speed. It doesn't have the speed to kind of elude kind of the tackles that he used to have when he was a little bit younger, but he still has such arm strength and physical ability, even at his age and with his injuries, that if you give him enough time to kind of look downfield and able to read kind of what is downfield, he's got the experience and still has enough strength to make those throws and make them very, very accurately, and he will make you pay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something we really need to be very, very cautious of. To go back a little bit to what I spoke about with the Drew Lock stuff and the 2 tight end sets and wearing down, I actually think that is our approach that we should be taking with the Steelers. We've already tried going the 3 wide, and it did not work particularly well against the Ravens. We have another AFC North opponent here in the Pittsburgh Steelers coming up. The Steelers are in that same mold. The Bengals, the Steelers, the Ravens, they all play those gritty stuff, and the Browns. I mean, that's another team that we're going to get into later on in a few weeks' time. These teams are all built very similarly, and they're all very, very scary from a Denver Broncos perspective in the fact that they have aggressive fronts. They're typically good on defense, and they are gritty. They just have that kind of northern grit to them, Canadian. And just it's just the style of that northern kind of gritty style of play. And that can really, really wear down teams that are more, say, pass happy and a little less run orientated. So I think we need to flip the script a little bit. I think we need to go more 2 tight end sets. We need to slow down their pass rush with getting that additional edge protection from those 2 tight ends on either side. And I think we can really wear down the Steelers defense and start to grind them and then run the ball on them. And let's get back to our time of possession ownership that we had the previous 3 games to really win this game.
Yeah. Basically, like I said at the beginning of the show, Rich, we just cannot take this team, underestimate them, because sometimes when you corner an animal, that's when they're the most dangerous, and a team like the Steelers 1-3, they can turn the tables like they did on a powerhouse team like Buffalo, who is literally number 1 in almost every single ranking as of this recording. So we have to go in there. The defense has to step up. We talked about interior defensive linemen. Broncos defense needs to force a turnover. Okay. Vic Fangio's defense got embarrassed this past weekend. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. So they have to go out there and, prove that they can hang with the big dogs and that they're still an elite defense and that they can be. So, and with that, the other one is we need to get back to the running game. We need to pound the ground. I don't know why it is that Pat Shurmur pulled back Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams, but for some reason you got to let your quarterback kind of breathe a little bit, whether it's Bridgewater or Locke, kind of get their marbles together. And not only that, Rich, but you eat up clock, especially when you have a lead and you want to maintain it. Running your running backs, you chew up clock, and you start to wear the defense out a little bit because you make them try to decide whether they should stack the box or play the outfield. So
you nailed it there, by the way. That last part there, absolutely nailed it. One of the biggest things you can do to wear out a pass rush is by running at them to slow them down, because they're constantly having to change pace, and it takes a lot more out of you tackling and stopping a running game as a defense. So if you can just stop the run with maybe minimal pressure and then still get in and kind of take care of business that way, and then drop a bunch back in coverage, you can save kind of the extra stacking of the box that you would need to do against other teams. The Denver Broncos were showing that we could run the ball really well, and Shurmur still moved away from the run.
Yeah.
And to your point, why on earth would you ever want to move away from something that's working?
Yeah, and right now is a perfect time to do it because TJ Watt is officially questionable, if I'm not mistaken. So
yes,
it doesn't look like he's going to be able to play yet on Sunday. That whole Steelers defense, aside from Micah Fitzpatrick, is probably like the most dangerous part of that Steelers defense. But everything else, the Broncos should have no problem in terms of dealing with. And which leads into Johnny Baki's question, where he asks us, what are you most worried about in the Steelers game? What I'm most worried about in the Steelers game, Baki, I guess if it's Drew Lock starting, it's the turnovers. As we saw this past weekend in the garbage time, Drew Lock threw an interception, and it's the very first turnover for the Broncos, where if it's Bridgewater.
And that was underthrown.
Yeah, and that was underthrown.
That was underthrown. So to your point, that was underthrown.
Yeah, so if Drew Lock starts, got to keep those turnovers down, man. You cannot throw interceptions like that, especially in the end zone, because those are the ones that hurt the most when it's a touchback. If it's Teddy Bridgewater, probably just staying upright, staying healthy. I mean, I always kind of shudder every time Bridgewater runs and, he makes a play with his feet, which is great. Don't get me wrong, but then we end up in situations like this where now we're all praying and hoping that he can clear concussion protocol before Sunday. So if it's him, it's just staying healthy, trusting his O-line. And the O-line would probably be like my second worry in terms of hopefully we can get Glasgow back and or not Glasgow, Reisner. Sorry, Glasgow is still for saying hopefully. It's, wishful thinking. One of those two I heard could have a chance of starting Sunday, but hopefully it's not rushed. Otherwise we could see more issues with that Pittsburgh defensive line getting in there and making a really uncomfortable day for either one of our starting quarterbacks.
I disagree with. I'm happy. I hate to potentially say something that's going to get a whole lot of people angry. But I'm quite okay with Miners staying in at that left guard spot. I do think that there's some arguments to be made for Glasgow coming back in at the right guard spot. That being said, I think that it's incredibly important that Moody gets that game day experience and that in-game experience, particularly against, as I was saying, these veteran riddled teams in the North that are actually really, really good at interior rushing. It allows Moody to leverage both his strength and work on his technique to try and get better in the game. So I think it's super, super important for us to kind of get those young guards that we have on our team that experience against quality NFL teams. And make no mistake, the Ravens and the Steelers are both quality NFL teams. I agree with a lot of what you said with regards to the Broncos and whatnot. One of my biggest concerns is to answer Johnny's question from my perspective is I'm concerned that we're going to try and rush Teddy back too soon. Concussions can be rather finicky, and it all depends on the individual. I'm concerned that Teddy might not be protected from himself because Shermer's going to be afraid that he's going to look bad again. And it really, really does concern me that we might be pushing him back too fast if he tries to come back right away. My other piece here is Rypien. I really, truly like Rypien. I'm maybe one of the lone people in all of Broncos country that's totally cool that Rypien steps in and plays, because I actually believe Rypien has a much closer skill set to that of Teddy Bridgewater. An average deep ball, not spectacular, but an average deep ball, relatively or somewhat accurate. At least Rypien was in college at the deep ball, but both very cerebral players. So line adjustments, reading the defenses, those types of things. And if you actually look at the overall true picture of those two players, Locke is actually really the odd man out when it comes to the kind of granular assessment of the various skill sets when you compare Teddy, Drew, and Brett. So Brett is actually a spectacular backup for a guy like Teddy. And based on the way we've seen Teddy play, and the reason why I'm concerned we might be rushing him back too fast is if he gets hurt again because we bring him back too fast, that could put him out for an extended period of time, which I absolutely do not want to see, because we have some absolutely angry pass rushers coming up on our schedule with the Cleveland Browns and later on with the Raiders, who always play hard, whether we like it or not.
Agreed. And unfortunately, Rich, we are running out of time. So unfortunately, that's going to have to do it for today's show. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. Big shout out again to our special guest from Steeler Nation. Thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us your top five. Hopefully our top five actually work and come true, because we want to win. So,
Sir, can I just quickly interject? I know that a lot of people know that I am Canadian. You can tell by the flag behind me. I've had a couple people reach out to me on Twitter just saying, hey, I'm a Canadian Broncos fan too. I think that's awesome. I created the vector image for my Canadian flag behind me. I actually have the digital copy of it. I also have a local manufacturer here that printed the custom flag behind me. Please reach out to me on Twitter if it is something you're interested in, and I can put you in touch with both me giving you the image in order for you to get it, as well as the printing company that I worked with in order for me to get it as well. So I've had a few comments and questions on it, so I wanted to get it out there.
Oh, that's very awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Rich.
Thanks.
Guys, that's going to have to do us for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Mahai 6, Johnny the Boss, Avatar, Vic was here. Who else? I'm going to run down some names. KB32, Dave Glassman as always, Mahai Prophet, DG King, Shadowjacker, Jerry Holland, EJ, and Travis Tarbox. If I missed you, Chad Marcellus, if I missed anybody, I do apologize. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And just want to remind you guys to make sure you tune in every single Tuesday for every single episode of Broncos Talk, which you can watch at 7654. And you can follow us on Facebook, Twitch, and any of our social media platforms. Don't forget, every single Thursday, we have the MHRT Podcast Network show, which is the flagship show, which you can also watch at 7654 every single Thursday. And then on Friday, we have the Nothing Rhymes with podcast with our good friends, Isaiah and Johnny, who you saw in the chat today, and they go live every single Friday at 7654. And again, the Neigh-borhood, which is the pregame show that airs 1 hour before every single Broncos game. And we have special guest Mahi Prophet, who does the tailgate party for every single Broncos home game. So guys, it's a lot of episodes. It's a lot of stuff, and it's all jam-packed into one fantastic network. So make sure you guys hit that thumbs up button, hit that notification so you get live notifications on when we go live on any one of these great shows. So before we go, Rich, of course, we have to do the Ma High Five. Rich, so are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Ma High Five! Woo! Guys, thank you so much. We'll see you all next time.
Next
Hasta
Tuesday.
luego.